It's wonderful to see you all here this morning. It's a lot of pressure, being the first one speaking on Monday. Bear with me. My topic this morning is the first man God called righteous. Righteousness is the quality of being right in the eyes of God, in character, conscience, and conduct. This is not just a checklist, list of do's and don'ts for us to follow. It is God as the standard. God is righteous in all his ways. Psalm 145:17. Righteousness is not just about this checklist. It's about embodying the heart and character of God, living in a way that honors and glorifies him and fulfills the purpose for which we were created. This is a God-centered attribute that we cannot attain without God's word. Christ gave us one of many lessons in his Sermon on the Mount when he said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled." Matthew 5:6. In God's word, in his commandments, we can attain righteousness. In God, we can attain righteousness. The first time the word righteous is used in the Bible is Genesis 6:9, which will be covered later by one of my brothers. But that's not the first man who was called righteous by God. That honor falls to another man, a man named Abel. He doesn't have a long story or even a long life, but he lived a righteous life in the eyes of God. So we're going to look at 3 points concerning Abel today. We are going to look at the faith of Abel, we are going to look at the sacrifice of Abel, and we are going to look at the legacy of Abel. First, the faith of Abel. Hebrews 11:4. By faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he had witness borne to him that he was righteous, God bearing witness in respect of his gifts, and through it he, being dead, yet speaketh. We see that faith requires action in this text. By faith Abel offered unto God. Abel did something because of his faith. His faith was an active faith. And it's not just Abel either. All throughout that text, the hall of faith, some people did something based on their faith. The faith of the Bible is never passive. It's not just a warm, fuzzy feeling in your heart. It's not just a belief in something. It is active. Abel's faith was made evident through his actions. His act of giving was his faith. It was a living faith, as defined in James 2:17. But is it just actions? Is it just the works? Faith without actions is dead. If we do not have the actions, then that will lead to that terrifying end when we say, "Lord, Lord," and he answers, "I never knew you." Matthew 7:21-23. But it's not just the actions that matter. It is the heart also. Our faith is in our actions, but it originates from the heart. Mark 12:30. King Solomon warns us in Proverbs to keep the heart because out of it are the issues of life. Proverbs 4:23. It is central to our relationship with God, and it is where our faith and our intentions are rooted. Abel's faith was sincere and heartfelt. This was evident in the quality of his sacrifice. He brought the firstlings of his flock and the fat portions thereof. When Paul talks to Timothy about remaining steadfast in the faith, not being swayed by false teachers, he makes it plain that to do this, you must have a pure heart, a good conscience, and an unfeigned faith. Abel had an unfeigned faith. He wasn't pretending, he wasn't putting on a show, and it wasn't because he was forced. He was doing it because he had faith in God. The things that proceed from the mouth come from the heart, and they can defile a man, but they can also show you who is righteous. Matthew 15:18-19. Our words and our actions are as much an indicator of our heart's conditions as they were Abel's and Cain's. Because in stark contrast to Abel's faith, we have Cain's lack thereof. While it explicitly states that Abel gave of the firstlings of his flock, no such thing is mentioned for Cain. God required first fruits, and while Abel gave of his first fruits, Cain did not. Proverbs 3:9 shows that principle. Cain's actions were rooted in defiance and jealousy and obligation, but they were certainly not rooted in love, and certainly not faith. Earlier, Cain's actions, 1 John 3:12 shows us this. So we must examine our own offerings to God. Earlier in that 1 John passage, in verse 10, it says, "In this the children of God are manifest, and the children of the devil. Whosoever doeth not righteousness is not of God, neither he that loveth not his brother." It is important for us to examine our works and what we offer to God. Are we offering works of righteousness like Cain, works that glorify God? Or is our offering more like Cain's? But our second point today, the sacrifice of Abel. Genesis 4:4-5 says, "And Abel, he also brought the firstlings of his flock and the fat thereof, and Jehovah had respect unto Abel and to his offering. But unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell." Another very important point in this story is Abel's obedience versus Cain's preference. Abel gave what God commanded. Cain gave what he wanted. Abel gave the best of what he had, and that is contrasted by Cain giving less than that, which reflected his heart's disposition towards God. He was holding back not only of his first fruits, but he was holding back his heart from God. This story prompts us to ask the important question, for whom are we worshiping? Abel was clearly worshiping for God, but Cain was not. We must ask if when we are worshiping, are we seeking to honor and glorify God, or are our acts of worship merely to satisfy our own desires? So often in today's society, there are thousands of people who profess Christianity but worship contrary to God because it sounds better or because it makes more sense. That's not why we worship, though. When we act and talk like this, we are not worshiping to God. We are worshiping for self. We are worshiping like Cain. Worship requires sacrifice on our part, whether that be time, comfort, or resources, but it cannot merely be out of obligation. It must be out of a sincere commitment to God. 1 Samuel 15:22. We are sacrifices holy and acceptable, and the cost of true worship is giving up our own desires and following Christ. Matthew 16:24. God gave a blueprint of what he desired to Cain and Abel. He gave a blueprint to Abraham, to Moses, and he has given a blueprint to us. Cain chose to go the way that so many in the past have and so many in the future will, to ignore that blueprint and follow their own desires. But Abel followed the blueprint, and his offering was acceptable. Will we follow the blueprint and be acceptable? Genesis 4:6-7, God tells Cain, sin is lurking at the door. Is sin lurking at our door? And how are we going to handle that? And all this begs the question, though, what is true worship? Jesus told the woman at the well to worship in spirit and in truth, John 4:23-24. And in John 17:17, it tells us that God's word is truth. So to worship in spirit and in truth, we must worship according to God's command. If we are not worshiping according to God's command, it is not true worship. It is not following the blueprint he has given us. So what are we holding back from God? When we worship contrary to God, offering only what we want, or offering rather than offering what he commands and what he desires? Have we sacrificed in our lives for God? When we are posting on our chosen social media, do we ask ourselves if this is something that can glorify God, or do we, like so many others, use social media as a mask to cover up our actions? Do we faithfully spread God's word, teaching it lovingly but firmly, or when this unrighteous world pushes back, do we immediately sit down? But moving to our third point, the legacy of Abel. Matthew 23:35 says, "That upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of Abel the righteous unto the blood of Zachariah, son of Berechiah, whom ye slew between the sanctuary and the altar." Abel died early, but his legacy to Christ lasted to Christ's time and now our time. Abel demonstrated a heart that was wholly devoted to God, to obedience, and to righteousness. His life, though fleeting, serves as an important lesson for us all, because his righteous deeds continue to speak today, demonstrating the kind of lives we are to live. Abraham Lincoln allegedly said, "In the end, it is not the amount of years in the life that matters, but the life in the years." And Abel's story teaches the lesson. It is not the length of our days that determines the weight of our legacy. He shows that not only is it possible to follow God's commands, but when we do, we can make an enduring impact on the lives of others. His life is not just a historical footnote. It is something that resonates with us here today, thousands of years later. His life teaches us that in a world that values righteousness so little, it still holds great value. We are to let our light be a beacon for those in the world, glorifying God above all else. Matthew 5:16. And in order to do this, we must live a life well-pleasing to God. Christ said in John 14:15, "If you love me, keep my commandments." Our love for God is made evident, made manifest in our actions, in our obedience. James tells us to be doers of the word, not hearers only, James 1:22. What good is it for God to have given us his word, his blueprint, his command, if we are not going to follow it? And what kind of an impact will we make on this world if we are not obeying God? The theme of the lectureship this year is Righteousness Exalts a Nation, and this is exemplified in the story of Abel and in the legacy that he left on this world. He showed us that to be righteous, we must have an active and sincere faith rooted in true worship, not just an obligation or ritual. Abel gave his life worshiping and glorifying God. Are we willing to do the same? Thank you.